the 19th of May, the anniversary of the death of a Queen of England. Every year, on this day, a bouquet of red roses is delivered anonymously to the chapel of the Tower of London.
They are accompanied by a simple request. They are to be laid just over there, on the spot where the second wife of Henry VIII, Anne Boleyn, was buried on this day in 1536.
I'm historian Tracy Borman. Over the next 3 nights, I'm going to explore the incredible story of Anne's downfall.
Look at that, it's just exquisite.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
It all took place in the space of just 17 days.
I've studied Anne for most of my life. I think I know her well, but I'm going to do something that I've never done before. I'm going to follow in Anne's footsteps, take the journey with her hour by hour during the 3 most important days from Queen to outcast, to find the truth behind her downfall.
That is incredible. Can I just put it in my pocket? I'll look at the day she's arrested, the day she's tried, and the day she's beheaded.
In this first episode, I'll be tracing the events of Anne Boleyn's last day of freedom. For the first time in history, a Queen of England has been arrested and imprisoned in the Tower of London, and she faces charges for which the penalty is death.
It's 8 o'clock in the morning on Tuesday, the 2nd of May, 1536. Since dawn, 3 hours ago, the streets have been crowded with traders, selling to passing travellers. The River Thames is full of boats carrying people and goods. And in Whitehall, a plan is being hatched. At one of the king's palaces, he has almost 60, servants are preparing Henry VIII's main meal of the day. Things seem normal.
In 1536, Henry isn't yet the oversized king we tend to think of. He's fit and active, and his weight hasn't yet ballooned. And this morning, he's been busy already. He sent a message to one of his other palaces. And it's a message that will change the course of history forever.
Leaving Henry's palace at Whitehall, the messenger starts his journey eastwards along the River Thames, towards Henry's wife, Queen Anne Boleyn. She is at another royal palace down the river, in Greenwich, the magnificent Palace of Placentia. This is Anne's favourite residence. The name means pleasant palace, but it will not live up to that today. We're told Anne starts the day watching a game of real tennis. It's a favourite sport of hers, and also of her husband Henry, who frequently plays matches. Anne Boleyn stands out in the English court as stylish, intellectual, and charismatic. She has already experienced plenty of drama in her 35 years. Born in England, Anne was educated in France and later became a lady-in-waiting to Henry VIII's first wife, Catherine of Aragon. Henry spotted her at court, wooed her, and they fell in love. He had his marriage to Catherine annulled, And now Henry and Anne have been married for 3 years. They have a young daughter, the future Queen Elizabeth I. But today, unusually, Anne is watching alone, and that must feel ominous, given what happened yesterday at the May Day jousts. King Henry received some news which set him on edge. He left without warning for the palace at Whitehall, leaving Anne by herself at Greenwich. Anne loves to have a flutter on sporting events, and the story goes that she's just regretting not having placed a bet on the winner when the message that the king sent this morning arrives with ominous instructions. The king's message from Whitehall has arrived by boat at Greenwich. The instruction is simple but ominous. It says, by order of the king, Anne must present herself before the Privy Council here at Greenwich. Her heart must sink. She knows that the council is the most important advisory body in the kingdom, and so this must be really serious. The world Anne lives in is full of intrigue. As people struggle for the king's attention. Anne has climbed to the top, but there are plenty of people who want to drag her down. This letter by a foreign ambassador, Eustace Chapuis, is full of court gossip. Chapuis is reporting that Anne, whom he refers to throughout as the concubine and great whore, this is absolutely typical. There's nothing but criticism of Anne, the concubine, the woman who has led the king astray. In one of his most cutting comments, he reports that Henry is tiring of Anne and looking out for a new, younger wife.
It's the joy and pleasure a man feels in getting rid of a thin, old, vicious horse, in the hope of getting soon a fine horse to ride.
It really is incredibly thrilling as a Tudor historian to get my hands on documents such as this. They're telling us what people are saying about Anne at this time, the sorts of rumours that are circulating. So you get the feeling of the weight of evidence that is gathering against Anne. There's nothing here in her favour. It seems nobody is prepared to speak in her defence.
The documents record what happens next on May the 2nd. At the palace in Greenwich. Anne is escorted from the tennis courts, which are part of the vast palace, to a council chamber at the other side of the complex.
Anne makes her way across the courtyard to the Privy Council meeting in full view of everyone. I can only imagine what must be running through her mind. Perhaps she's fearing that, like Catherine of Aragon, Henry is going to divorce her. She must be racking her brains trying to think of just what she's done wrong.
At the council chamber, she is met by 3 grave-faced men who rise to their feet.
One of them is the Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle. You'd have thought that he'd want to help her, but in fact, the two can't stand each other. Also there is William Kingston, Constable of the Tower of London and a member of the Privy Council.
Anne later claimed that
I was cruelly handled at Greenwich, with the King's counsel, with my Lord of Norfolk. And then he said, "Tut, tut, tut."
Well, tut, 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 that sounds like quite a mild reprimand. But what the council then said to Anne was earth-shattering. They charged her with adultery with Sir Henry Norris.
This is a bolt from the blue. Norris is one of the king's oldest friends. Until now, he's been one of Henry's most trusted courtiers. To make matters worse, Anne's also accused of adultery with a common and brash court musician, Mark Smeaton, and a mysterious third, unnamed man.
Anne must be absolutely reeling from this, but somehow she holds it together.
She says,
I am the King's true wife.
and that no other man has ever touched her.
It's interesting that even now, in the midst of her shock, the first thing she does is protest her innocence.
Rumours travel like lightning in the Tudor court. After questioning, Anne's escorted under guard back to her rooms, forced to cross the palace courtyard again in full view of everyone.
This is all incredibly demeaning. No other Queen of England has ever suffered such humiliation. Gossip must already be spreading across the palace. And as Anne makes her way back to her private apartments, her mind must be spinning. What's going on? Is the king behind this, or is it a plot by her enemies to destroy her? Little does she know, much worse is to come.
In Greenwich, at the Palace of Placentia, Anne is back in her apartments, under armed guard. Despite the charges, she tries to follow her normal routine. Anne sits down to dinner.
She's clearly doing her best to try and maintain appearances that all is well. She's dressed in a sumptuous gown of red velvet and cloth of gold, and she sits beneath a canopy of estate, a symbol of her authority as queen, which is ironic because that authority has started to crumble.
The people around Anne are acting strangely. Her ladies are upset and tearful, and most ominous of all is that the king's waiter, who usually appears at mealtimes to say,
"Much good may it do you,"
on behalf of the king, doesn't appear.
Anne is so distressed that finally her composure starts to crumble. She must be wondering, as must everybody else in the room, what is going to happen next.
But today's events haven't come out of the blue. Anne's troubles began 3 months ago, when she was expecting a son. Henry's marriage to his first wife, Catherine, had broken down because after almost 25 years, they'd failed to produce a son. To continue the Tudor dynasty, he needs a male heir. The duty now falls to Anne. 3 months ago, she was pregnant. The king and queen were pinning all their hopes on it being a son. Proof of the anticipation of this new male arrival is a commemorative medal produced by Anne. Known as the Most Happy Medal, she planned to distribute it across the nation to celebrate the birth and to boost her own image. Just the prototype survives, locked away in the British Museum.
I feel like a burglar.
I'm about to come face to face with Anne for the very first time.
Wow, it is really exciting. It's amazing the detail. You can see so much more. I've only ever seen pictures of this.
Do you want to handle it?
Okay, is that okay? Oh. This feels like looking at Anne Boleyn. It really is quite extraordinary, and yet very, very different to the way that I think of her, the way that I've been influenced by those later portraits, whereas this is the only known likeness of Anne actually taken during her lifetime. So this is Anne as she really was. This is just incredibly thrilling to see. There weren't any others made, this was it. And Anne was quite a control freak, so the chances are that Anne, perhaps Henry too, actually held this. Shivers down the spine. So this is a piece of propaganda. This is the Tudor equivalent of Twitter. I wonder what she made of it when she saw it. Can I just put it in my pocket now and go? That is incredible.
But 3 months ago, tragedy struck. Anne suffered a miscarriage. Worse, it seems it was a baby boy, the heir that Henry was so desperate for.
This is a major blow for Henry and an absolute disaster for Anne. All of Henry's doubts come flooding back.
Henry believes that
God did not permit them to have a son.
and there are rumours that he believed he might
Take another wife.
Straight away, Henry begins thinking of ditching Anne for someone who can give him a son. Step forward this man, Thomas Cromwell, the so-called fixer who has made it his job to make Henry's deepest wishes come true. As Anne finishes her meal today, she knows Cromwell must be behind this attempt to bring her down. He's spent the last few weeks secretly building a case against her from his base here at Austin Friars. Today, the area lies in the shadow of the City of London's skyscrapers. The son of a blacksmith, Cromwell's risen to be the king's special advisor. By promising to make Henry
the richest sovereign who ever reigned in England.
I've come to Thomas Cromwell's power base to get a political perspective on him from journalist Owen Jones.
Hi, Owen.
Hi, how you doing?
Nice to meet you. Well, we're here on the site of Thomas Cromwell's original house, and it's from here that he did so much of his plotting. We can see him as the original spin doctor, Mr. Fixer. There are some pretty obvious modern parallels, aren't there?
I think the parallels are very, very striking indeed. You had to use cunning and you had to be devious. You had to constantly see it as a chess game where you had to outmaneuver and defeat your opponents ruthlessly. That kind of tradition of the spin doctor, whether it be Peter Mandelson and Dominic Cummings, I bet I wouldn't be surprised if they hadn't themselves looked back at Thomas Cromwell with some admiration. And who knows, maybe they were partly inspired by him.
So it's a case of the end justifying the means.
Remorselessly so. Even if the way you get there is seen as morally very dubious, very problematic, even scandalous. As long as you get to where you want to get to, as long as you achieve that sacred goal, then everything can be justified.
For people like Cromwell, he has this huge amount of power and influence, but he has a job to do. Instead of get Brexit done, it's get rid of the Queen of England. And so he knows the risks that he's taking, and that if he fails, really, it's his neck on the line.
I think politicians are risk seekers. They're adrenaline junkies. They like the idea that they could suddenly amass all this power, but at any moment it could all come crumbling down. So I think there is that sense of politics is seen as a bit of a game.
From his house in Austin Friars, Cromwell makes his way across the city to Greenwich. The net is closing in on Anne. Cromwell's skill is finding out what the king wants and making it happen.
When Henry had grown tired of his first wife, Catherine, Cromwell had turned against her. Now Henry has grown tired of Anne, Cromwell has turned against her too. Well, his first move has been to put Anne in front of the Privy Council. Now it's time to put the next part of his plan into action.
Cromwell enters Anne's dining room, together with a large entourage of important men, including her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk.
Earlier this morning, Norfolk has been one of 3 men of the Privy Council to charge Anne with adultery. Now he's carrying a scroll, which is a warrant for his niece's arrest. Clearly, blood is not thicker than water in the Boleyn family. Loyalty to the king is more important for political survival.
Anne rises from her seat, asking why they have come. Norfolk says,
"We came by the king's command to conduct Anne to the Tower of London."
Discovering that she is being taken to the Tower must be a horrific body blow for Anne. Her stomach must be churning. Yet remarkably, she holds it together.
Anne replies,
If it be His Majesty's pleasure, then I am ready to obey.
She's given no time to pack, to summon her ladies-in-waiting, or say goodbye to her beloved 2.5-year-old daughter, Elizabeth.
Why the need for all this haste? Well, Cromwell is painfully aware that Henry and Anne have always had a tempestuous relationship, furious rows, but each one followed by a passionate reconciliation. He has to act fast to make sure that that doesn't happen this time.
The Queen of England is under arrest. Her freedom gone. All she can do is wait in Greenwich to be taken down the Thames to the Tower of London. But while events in Greenwich play out, down the Thames in Whitehall, her husband is keeping a low profile.
Henry doesn't want to face his wife or the public. Strangely, though, he doesn't seem greatly troubled by events that are happening 10 miles from here in Greenwich. In fact, those people who do see him report that he's in great spirits, even rejoicing at Anne's fate.
The court has never been so lively. Feasts and banquets follow one another, much to the disgust of many of those there. Eyewitnesses report that he has
daily gone out to dine here and there with ladies, and sometimes has remained with them until after midnight.
It's all very strange behaviour, but perhaps mentally, Henry has already moved on from Anne.
This sudden rejection of Anne is particularly shocking because he courted her for so long. But what attracted Henry to her in the first place? It's difficult to know the truth about her looks and personality because pictures we have of her were painted after her death. But there may be clues on the Most Happy medal I looked at earlier. It features the only portrait of Anne created during her lifetime. It's badly damaged, but sculptor Lucy Churchill is using it to reconstruct her face.
I noticed when I looked at it under magnification, I noticed so much more detail.
I'm about to see the restored likeness of Anne for the first time.
Here is my version.
Oh, wow. That's amazing. Well, I must admit that my first reaction on seeing this is, what was Anne's appeal for Henry? We know that he was absolutely besotted with her.
The fact that she isn't conventionally beautiful, a lot of people are very disappointed. She is heavy-eyed, heavy-jawed. She was described as not the most beautiful woman at court, but she could dance, she was very good, very witty, very intellectual. She had charisma, and I think that's much more attractive than the idea of it being her superficial beauty that lured him in.
And what you can see from here is that she had self-confidence in spades.
Yes.
It looks like more of a Henry VIII pose. It looks like hands on hips. You can't actually see the rest of her arms, but back straight, head raised. This is Anne at her most self-confident, isn't it?
Under arrest, Anne's self-confidence is now in tatters. At Greenwich, she's been waiting for almost an hour for the boat to take her down the Thames. Anne is about to leave her beloved Greenwich Palace for the last time. Next stop, the Tower. In Greenwich, at the Palace of Placentia, Anne is escorted from her apartments down to the River Thames. Leading the way is the man responsible for arresting her, Thomas Cromwell.
This must be the way that Anne is led down the steps under arrest here to the beach, where there'll be a barge waiting for her to take her upriver to the Tower of London. And you can still see just over there the remains of the original Tudor pier from which Anne would have boarded the boat.
I'm now following in the wake of Anne's journey to the Tower of London.
Usually, state prisoners would have been taken to the Tower under cover of darkness, but Anne suffers the humiliation of being rowed there in full daylight. They really want to make her arrest very public indeed.
If that isn't bad enough, her nemesis, Thomas Cromwell, is with her on the boat.
It's as if he can't trust her arrest to others. He has to keep a close eye throughout. The atmosphere on the boat must be toxic.
Cromwell's agents have been at work spreading the word that the Queen has been arrested and is heading down the river. Within a matter of hours, the sensational news is all around London.
Today, the Thames is very quiet, but at the time of Anne's arrest, it would have been a bustling thoroughfare filled with boats and also crowded with spectators watching from the shore. And they would have all been hostile to this woman who they saw as a usurper. She'd ousted the rightful Queen, Catherine of Aragon.
After a 2-hour journey, Anne arrives at the Tower of London.
This is the tower as Anne is seeing it as she arrives from Greenwich. And it's incredibly imposing. When you see it from this view, you tend to approach by road and you don't get a sense of just how intimidating the fortress would have looked. Arriving here, particularly for Anne, who knows that she's arriving not as an honoured guest, but as a prisoner. Well, most prisoners who are brought to the Tower enter through Traitor's Gate, but Anne is brought here to what was known as the Court Gate, which was probably a nod to her status because, after all, prisoner she might be, but she's also still the Queen of England. Well, as Anne steps down here, the thunder of the Tower's cannon sounds all around her. She's renowned for her composure, but that now begins to crumble. She falls to her knees, protesting her innocence.
When Anne last arrived here 3 years ago, it was for her coronation celebrations. Remembering this, she says,
I was received with greatest ceremony the last time I entered here.
The Tower is a royal palace, but it's also an infamous prison. Responsibility for Anne now falls to Sir William Kingston, the constable of the Tower. Anne asks him,
Mr. Kingston, do I go into a dungeon?
Anne expects to be taken to one of the many cells within the Tower.
but instead she's taken the other way, towards the Queen's apartments. This is a great relief for Anne, and also a surprise. Perhaps it gives her a glimmer of hope that things might not be quite as bad as she feared. But on the other side of London, in Henry's Whitehall Palace, something incredible is cooking up. The case against Anne is developing fast, and it's about to get much darker. So far, Anne knows she's accused of adultery with Mark Smeaton, Henry Norris, and a mysterious third man. But who is he? Rumours are circulating that this third man is, in fact, her own brother, George Boleyn.
George has heard the rumour. Anne, as yet, is unaware. He races across London to hear Whitehall Palace, which once stood where these buildings are now. He's come to see the king, to plead his innocence, clear his name, and make a case for the Boleyns.
But George's attempt to win the king over is in vain. Cromwell has the king in lockdown, so he can control exactly what's going on. George has no chance of a meeting. Instead, he is arrested on the spot and charged with incest.
As if the charges of adultery against Anne aren't enough, they've really stepped up a gear with this claim. Cromwell's plot to destroy the Queen is all falling into place.
Now he needs Anne under lock and key while he plots his next move. Anne is under the watch of the Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston. He leads her to the Queen's apartments.
Well, thanks to this detailed map from the Tudor period, we know exactly where Anne's apartments were. They're on that lawn, long since demolished, but would have been very lavish, and they're certainly not what Anne is expecting. And that must have just added to her confusion. Why has she been brought here and lodged still as Queen?
The Queen's apartments, together with a great hall, connected the White Tower to the outer walls. Just 3 years ago, Henry spent £3,500, that's £1.5 million in today's money, rebuilding them for Anne's coronation. Inside, they are sumptuously decorated and furnished.
When Anne first sees her apartments, she cries out,
It is too good for me.
which seems an odd thing to say, given she's just protested her innocence. Is this an admission of guilt? Or is Anne trying to be clever, pretending to be humble in order to invite compassion?
Kingston recalled that Anne
knelt down, weeping at a good pace, and then fell into great laughing, and she has done so many times since.
It's clear that Anne is almost hysterical at the thought of what might now happen. To make matters worse, she's been appointed 4 ladies whom she neither likes nor trusts. Incredibly, one of them is her own aunt. Once again, family loyalty counts for nothing with the Boleyns. Well, it's obvious that these ladies have been placed there as spies by Cromwell. He knows that the evidence he's gathered so far is not enough. He needs more. And he's hoping that while Anne is here in the Tower, she'll say something to really incriminate herself.
As Cromwell waits for incriminating evidence from his spies, he plots the next move from Austin Friars. He has the Queen under lock and key. But what next?
Cromwell can't risk a repeat performance of Henry's split from Catherine of Aragon. She'd refused to go quietly and had caused a great deal of trouble for the king.
Even after the annulment, most people in Britain still see Catherine as the true queen. But not everyone does.
Anne is a good deal less popular than Catherine, but she's not without powerful supporters who might make trouble if Henry tries to divorce her. So Cromwell knows he needs to get rid of them, and fast.
He's already imprisoned 3 of her allies, Sir Henry Norris, musician Mark Smeaton, and a third man, who has turned out to be her brother, George Boleyn, all accused of adultery with the Queen. Across London, Cromwell's trap is closing in on Anne and anyone who can help her.
Now he must prepare for the trial of the century, in which he'll bring down these supporters and the Queen of England herself.
Just a stone's throw away from Cromwell's base at Austin Friars, at the Tower of London, Anne Boleyn prepares for her first night as a prisoner. Her mood is darkening. Kingston pays her a visit.
Anne insists on her innocence to Kingston. She protests,
I am the king's true wedded wife.
and then she asks, Mr. Kingston, do you know wherefore I am here? And he replies, no. Whether he does know or not is a different matter.
In desperation, Anne demands to know where her supporters are, in particular, her father.
The truth is, her father Thomas has abandoned her in order to save his own skin.
Across the city in Whitehall, the king retires for the night. His wife imprisoned, he is alone.
As the events of the day draw to a close, Cromwell sends a message to the king here at Whitehall.
The message updates the king with the allegations against his wife.
When the king reads it, he's utterly distraught.
An eyewitness tells us,
the king begins to weep.
Were the tears genuine? Was Henry just putting on a show, or did he truly love Anne? I think it more likely that Henry was feeling sorry for himself, that the woman whom he'd raised to be Queen of England had betrayed him.
At the Tower, Anne is settling in for the first night away from her husband as a prisoner.
The Tower is a place full of foreboding, particularly at night. And I can only imagine what Anne must have been feeling during her first night as a prisoner here, desperately wanting to know what fate lay ahead for her. Well, there is a letter in existence that's said to have been written by Anne to her husband, the king. In it, she writes, "Try me, good king, but let me have a lawful trial, and let not my sworn enemies sit as my accusers and judges, for my truth shall fear no open shame." Anne is asking for a fair trial, but is that what she's going to get?
It's dawn in London. For the first time in history, the Queen of England is about to be tried for adultery and treason. If she's found guilty, her fate will be death. I'm historian Tracy Borman. Over 3 nights, I'm exploring the incredible story of Anne's downfall.
Look at that, it's just exquisite.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
It all took place in the space of just 17 days.
I've studied Anne for most of my life. I think I know her well, but I'm going to do something that I've never done before. I'm going to follow in Anne's footsteps, take the journey with her hour by hour during the 3 most important days from queen to outcast, to find the truth behind her downfall. That is incredible. Can I just put it in my pocket?
I'm exploring exactly what went so devastatingly wrong for Anne Boleyn. I've already investigated what happened on the day of her arrest.
In this episode, I'll be tracing the events of Anne Boleyn's trial.
Even by the standards of its day, it was a complete outrage.
I want to find out if she stands any chance of a fair hearing, or is her fate sealed from the beginning? Can Anne possibly save herself?
It's 7:30 a.m. on Monday, the 15th of May, 1536. In an hour and a half, the trial of Anne Boleyn will begin at the Tower of London, in its Great Hall.
Well, we can locate the Great Hall precisely on this Tudor map. It would have stood over there on the far side of the lawn, but demolished in the 17th century or so. Sadly, we can only imagine what it must have been like.
Today, the Great Hall at the Tower is hosting the most infamous trial in Tudor England, instead of the banquets and meetings it's more used to.
Well, you can imagine the atmosphere when everyone is gathered in the courtroom is just electric. This is the trial of one of the most famous women in Europe, and her dirty laundry is about to be aired in public. It really is the scandal of the century.
Some of the most important men in the kingdom are gathering, including the architect of Anne's arrest, the king's right-hand man, Thomas Cromwell. Just 3 years ago, Cromwell masterminded Henry's marriage to Anne, hoping she'd give the king a son, but she hasn't. Cromwell and Anne are now at loggerheads, and his relationship with the king hangs by a thread. Anne must go. Anne was arrested 13 days ago. Cromwell's ensured there's little time before the trial, and to guarantee things go his way, he selected the judge and jury.
Reading a list of who's gathered here for the trial, it's a who's who of Tudor England. Remarkably, presiding over the whole thing is Anne's own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk.
It may seem a risky move for Cromwell to put someone so close to Anne in charge. But Cromwell has his reasons. 5 years ago, the Duke of Norfolk predicted that Anne would be
the ruin of all her family.
Cromwell is confident that when it comes to the crunch, Norfolk will side with the king. Anne's fate will be decided by a jury of 26 peers, including her own father.
Thomas Boleyn is a ruthlessly ambitious politician. He puts his career ahead of everything, even, or especially, his own children. Even though these men, in theory, are loyal to Anne, if they don't vote the way the king wants, their necks are going to be on the line.
At the centre of the room, on a raised platform so all can see, is a chair where Anne will sit. Members of the public are being allowed to watch the trial. 2,000 have squeezed in, desperate to know how this is going to play out.
Anne is being accused of one of the most salacious acts imaginable, punishable by death. The stakes really couldn't be higher.
But there is one person missing from the trial. Across London, at York Place in Whitehall, the king is out of bed and being dressed by his gentlemen.
Where these buildings now stand was Henry's Palace of Whitehall, and it's here that he's lying low today as Anne's trial takes place. But he's keeping a close eye on the proceedings. If Anne is found guilty, then a cannon will be fired from the tower. And if she is out of the way, then Henry already has plans for who he's going to marry next.
1 mile down the River Thames from Whitehall, in Chelsea, is the woman who the king hopes will be his next wife, Jane Seymour. She's already being kept like a queen.
Henry has been obsessed by Jane for the past few months, and the affair hasn't gone unnoticed by Anne. There are rumours recently that the king's been giving Jane priceless gifts and love letters. And on one occasion, Anne apparently spots Jane wearing a new locket and demands to see it more closely. When Jane refuses, Anne rips it from around her neck and opens the locket to find a picture of the king. She is furious.
Since Anne's arrest, Jane has been kept out of sight in the countryside. As a lady-in-waiting to Anne Boleyn, her presence in court would cause gossip that he can do without. Yesterday, with Anne's trial drawing nearer, Henry orders that Jane be brought back to London to be close to him. Now she's just a mile downriver at Chelsea, where Henry can visit her secretly in the night. He assures Jane that soon all this pretense will be over. At the Tower of London, the court is now assembled. And in the Great Hall, the most well-known woman in England is set to enter the stage. Silence is called for, and the Duke of Norfolk, Anne's uncle, remember, shouts out,
"Gentlemen, jailer of the Tower, bring in your prisoner."
Anne is led into the courtroom, flanked by the gentleman jailer, his axe turned away from her because she's not yet proven guilty, and also by 4 ladies. Now, these ladies aren't of Anne's choosing, but of Cromwell's. He's placed them in her service to watch and record everything she says and does.
Spectators remark that she's never looked more in control.
Anne's composure is remarkable. Several eyewitnesses comment on it. She doesn't flinch even when she looks across and sees her own father sitting on the jury.
Everyone is in place. The trial is about to begin. If found guilty, Anne could be sentenced to death. The prosecution is led by Anne's arch-rival, Thomas Cromwell. But as the trial begins, things are already not going quite as planned.
Before Anne had come in, the crowds had been baying for her blood, but now she's conducting herself with such dignity, and clearly they weren't expecting that. When commoners are put on trial, they're made to stand throughout the proceedings, but Anne is still Queen of England, so she is allowed to sit. And you can imagine as she lowers herself into the chair and waits with apprehension to hear the charges against her.
Anne still doesn't know what she's being accused of. To discover the actual charges, I've come to the National Archives at Kew. This is where all the records that still exist from Anne's trial are stored.
Well, this is very exciting.
These incredible papers, in their original leather pouch, were kept in what's known as the Bag of Secrets.
Oh, there actually is a bag.
And then you get all of the papers.
And Sean Cunningham looks after them.
At the front of the original commissions and orders.
The records are written in Latin on 22 sheets of parchment.
It's amazing to think that this document would have actually been there in the trial room at the time.
That's right. It is a record of the process as it was unfolding. So some of this would have been in the hands of the people in the court at the time.
It makes it all chillingly real.
But as I examine the records, something isn't right. These documents are all telling the story from the side of the prosecution. There's no record of Anne's testimony.
We have here a huge body of evidence against Anne, the indictment, eyewitness accounts. Nothing in her defence has survived. And that surely is significant.
The indictment that details Anne's charges does still exist. Here, the charges are listed: adultery with 4 men, Henry Norris, William Brereton, Sir Francis Weston, and Mark Smeaton.
It's telling us that she's despised her marriage for 3 years, and she's...
3 years, so the whole marriage, really.
Pretty much, yes. I mean, it's setting up the adultery and relationship with her accomplices in such a way that it undermines the king's status and dignity.
And what's the significance of the men who are accused with Anne?
They're all gentlemen, apart from Mark Smeaton. So these are the young men who've grown up with Henry or are serving Henry and his family. And so they spend a lot of their time in the king's direct presence. It's really explaining how they have been wooed by Anne's charms to be her lovers.
The indictment alleges how Anne is
following daily her frail and carnal lusts, did falsely and traitorously procure kisses and touching of the king's daily and familiar servants, to be her adulterers and concubines.
In court, the charges are read out to Anne. She is accused of some 20 acts of adultery.
So now that Anne knows what she's accused of, how on earth must she be feeling? Well, she's sure of her innocence. That comes across definitely. And she's also got great faith, so perhaps she thinks that God will deliver her from all this because he knows she's innocent, so he'll make sure that justice prevails. But mingled with all of that self-righteousness, there must be terror, disbelief, and outrage. She must feel like screaming.
In the courtroom, the spectators are on the edge of their seats, listening to these charges and waiting for Anne's response. But Anne is completely calm, certain of her innocence, believing God will intervene with a miracle to prove it.
An eyewitness describes how she seemed unmoved. She said little, but no one to look at her would have thought her guilty. Cromwell must now be growing agitated. This isn't going the way he thought. He'd planned it all out very carefully. He must have thought it was a done deal, but now he senses the atmosphere changing and he must be terrified that it's all going to go against him.
Because Anne has a hidden weapon. She's not just the intellectual equal of most of the men there, she's their superior. Anne's had the benefit of an education abroad, very unusual for a Tudor woman.
She stands apart in Henry's court as somebody who champions the role of women, the qualities of women, and her feistiness, if we can call it that, is what attracts Henry. He loves the fact she's different to all the other women in his court. Well, he loves that when she's a mistress, but when she becomes his wife, that's something else entirely, and he turns against her, at least partly for that reason.
Anne has been accused of adultery, a deeply serious allegation. But then the next part of the indictment is read out. Anne is also accused of having a sexual relationship with her brother George, the crime of incest. And the records spare no details in describing the siblings' alleged affair.
There's quite a lot about the carnal contact and the lusting and the secret associations of Anne and her brother. They're talking about the Queen and her brother kissing.
The court records claim that Anne encouraged her brother,
alluring him with her tongue in the said George's mouth, and the said George's tongue in hers, with their eyes wide open.
There's allegations of diabolical sorcery.
Witchcraft as well is flung at her.
And lots of carnal lust. She's presented, even in the language, as someone who's not in control of her passions.
To make the charge of incest stand up, Cromwell needs to provide some proof.
The evidence for Anne's incest with her brother is flimsy, to say the least. All it was the fact that Anne had written to George telling him that she was pregnant. Well, that was taken to mean that the child was his.
And as if the incest wasn't devastating enough, Cromwell also finds a way to really twist the knife.
It all gets deeply personal because, as well as the incestuous relationship between Anne and George, it's recorded that they laughed at the king behind his back. They made fun of his clothes, of his poetry. You know, it's deeply humiliating for Henry, and it's just another nail in Anne's coffin.
But to be sure this would stand up in court, Cromwell needs to find someone who can testify. In the run-up to Anne's trial, from his base in Austin Friars, in the depths of the city, Cromwell's men scoured London for juicy evidence. What they come up with is a star witness, someone who confirms the incest between Anne and George. What's remarkable about this is that the witness is George's own wife, Lady Rochford.
This is a mind-blowing claim because she's incriminating her own husband. Why on earth would she do this? We know that they have an unhappy marriage. So perhaps she's jealous of just how close George is to his sister Anne. Whatever the case, it's clear she's out to get George and to bring Anne down with him.
In the courtroom, Anne is still insisting on her innocence and fighting off the evidence brought against her.
The atmosphere in the room begins to change as Anne defends herself against the charges. This is the woman who's the scandal of Christendom, called the great whore and the concubine, and yet she's conducting herself with such wisdom and discretion that people are beginning to sympathise with her. It looks like it's going to go her way.
Is it possible she will be found not guilty?
Anne Boleyn, Queen of England and second wife of Henry VIII, is accused of adultery and incest. At the start of her trial, she appears to be a dead woman walking, but now the atmosphere in the courtroom is starting to change. Even her most bitter enemies are impressed by her robust defence. Can she turn it all around?
The men Anne has been accused of adultery with are her husband's most trusted and intimate courtier, Henry Norris, along with William Brereton and Sir Francis Weston, all members of the king's inner circle. Worse still, it's claimed she committed incest with her brother, George Boleyn. But Mark Smeaton, the fifth man accused, is of a much lower status. He's a simple court musician. 15 days ago, at Thomas Cromwell's house in Austin Friars, Smeaton was interrogated for 24 hours.
All of the other men grilled by Cromwell have totally denied the charges, but Smeaton doesn't. He cracks. He claims that Anne singles him out for special attention. He says that one morning, as she lay in bed, she summoned him to play music so her ladies could dance. As she watched him, she decided to seduce him. Mark admits to making love to the Queen on 3 occasions.
But was this true, or was Mark Smeaton attempting to save himself? A servant witnesses the horror of Smeaton's interrogation and casts doubt on his confession.
The account reads as follows. Then he called 2 stout young fellows of his
and asked for a rope and a cudgel, and ordered them to put the rope, which was full of knots, around Mark's head, and twisted it with the cudgel until Mark cried out, "Sir Secretary, no more. I will tell the truth."
In Tudor times, torture could be used as a way of getting people to admit guilt, but it couldn't be used on members of the nobility, only commoners like Mark Smeaton.
I think it's no coincidence that he's the only one to confess.
There is one admission in particular by Smeaton that is hard to believe.
It tells of the extraordinary lengths Anne would go to in order to get Smeaton into her bed. The problem is, as Queen, Anne has very little privacy. She's always surrounded by her ladies, so she has to come up with a cunning plan. And it involves her most trusted lady, Margaret, whose bedroom lies right next to Anne's. And it's also used to store dried fruits, sweetmeats, and marmalade.
According to Smeaton's confession, Margaret hides him behind a curtain until the coast is clear. Then Anne supposedly calls,
"Bring me a little marmalade,"
loud enough for any eavesdroppers to hear. Margaret leads Mark into Anne's bedchamber and supposedly says, "Here is the marmalade, my lady."
Anne tells her she may leave, and well, you can use your imagination for what happens next. It's interesting to reflect on the likelihood of these charges, because it's almost certain that Anne did flirt with the men at court, but then she'd been schooled in the art of what's known as courtly love. This is when a knight can court a woman far above him in status. He can wear her colours at a tournament, compose songs or poems, or even pursue her. But always the woman stays just out of reach, although in reality this behaviour did lead to sexual liaisons. But Anne is Queen of England after all. She's hardly ever alone, always surrounded by her ladies. She'd have had to have taken a huge risk to conduct an affair in secret. There's also the fact that Anne is a woman not lacking in self-control. She'd kept Henry at bay for 7 long years. Would she really lack the discipline to stay faithful to him now?
While all the charges of sexual liaison, even incest, might make Anne look like a scheming and lustful woman, would there be enough to get rid of her completely? Adultery was usually a crime for the church courts that would have seen the guilty woman exiled to a convent. But Henry wanted Anne gone, permanently.
So adultery wouldn't have been enough on its own to end Anne's life?
It would have made Henry very cross, and it made him look incompetent to the nation, which obviously he doesn't want to do. But something more formal and damaging has to be the final charge.
To ensure that Anne was disposed of forever, Cromwell had to engineer a charge that was far more serious. And he cooked up the most serious charge of all, that Anne had been plotting the death of the king, an act of high treason. Henry is a very paranoid king by this time, so it would be easy to convince him that there's a plot afoot from amongst his gentlemen. In the courtroom, Cromwell plays his trump card. He declares his discovery that Anne has plotted the death of the king. And he claims to have evidence from one of the men Anne is accused of sleeping with, Henry Norris.
Apparently, a couple of weeks before, Anne had quarrelled with Henry Norris. She'd asked him why he hadn't yet proposed to her cousin, Lady Shelton, and he'd replied that he was going to wait and see, which Anne took to mean that he was going to wait and hope to marry her instead.
In court, written testimony from William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower, says that when Henry Norris told Anne he was waiting, she said,
"You look for dead men's shoes. For if aught should come to the king but good, you would look to have me."
Well, this might all sound very flimsy and inconsequential, but the implication here is that it's just a short step for Anne from contemplating her husband's death to actually plotting it.
Cromwell has pulled off a masterstroke. Treason is as serious as it gets. It's the ultimate crime, and it's punishable only by death. Even as Anne Boleyn sits calmly, listening to the evidence against her, she's aware that her fate doesn't just rest on the trial today. 3 days ago, there was another trial, this time across London at Westminster Hall, right in the heart of government. Its outcome would profoundly affect Anne's situation. Being judged are 4 of the 5 men she's accused of having affairs with: Henry Norris, William Brereton, Sir Francis Weston, and Mark Smeaton. Ensuring the Queen is convicted rests on finding these men guilty.
The men were brought here by barge from the Tower to Westminster Hall. Well, today it's part of the Houses of Parliament, but then it was one of the most important law courts in the kingdom.
There are no surviving official records of the trial, only eyewitness accounts.
Well, you have to imagine that this ancient hall is crowded with people, lining the walls on either side, courtiers, the jury, of course, and the men are led into the centre where they stand. You can imagine them gazing nervously around, and their hearts must have sank as they saw all those hostile faces staring at them.
The men stand to hear the charges.
Well, we have here a record of the attainder that's read out against the men, and it says they had violated
and had carnal knowledge of the said Queen, each person at different times.
Like the Queen, they have no witnesses testifying for them. They are only allowed to declare their guilt or their innocence.
They all say not guilty, except one. Mark Smeaton confesses that he had, quote, carnal knowledge of the Queen 3 times.
The Lord Chancellor then reads out the sentence. They are to be publicly hanged, drawn, and quartered. Their members cut off and burnt before them. Their executions are postponed until after the verdict of Anne's trial. Instead, they are returned to the Tower of London to await their fate. There are no records as to where the condemned men are locked up within the Tower, but I believe there are some clues etched into the ancient stonework.
As a historian and curator, I spend a lot of time in historic buildings, grand state rooms, examining archives and the like. But this gives me an absolute thrill, because graffiti like this gives you an insight into the past like none other. It really does feel like you're almost touching history. This was left behind, quite possibly, by the very men who are accused of adultery with the Queen of England.
The graffiti shows a carving of a falcon, the emblem of the Boleyn family.
I think this gives us a little glimpse into the state of mind of those men, if it was them who carved this, because carving Anne's symbol after they've been found guilty of adultery with her is almost like an act of defiance. They're still supporting her, even now, as they face death.
As the condemned men await their sentence, just meters away in the Tower's Great Hall, Anne's trial reaches its conclusion. She's done all she can to convince the court that she deserves to go free. Now, Anne must wait for the verdict.
this point, Anne seems to think that justice will prevail and she'll be found not guilty. After all, she's conducted herself throughout the trial like a woman who knows herself to be innocent.
All of the evidence that's been presented against her has been questionable, and her faith and belief in her innocence are total.
As she and everyone else here awaits the verdict, the tension must be palpable.
The judge, Anne's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, sends the jury to deliberate, including her own father, Thomas Boleyn. The room holds its breath. It takes them just moments to reach their decision.
They are unanimous. Anne is found guilty of treason. It must have hit her like an electric shock. Her mind must be spinning with the implications.
Immediately, she's stripped of her crown and her titles. She is no longer Queen of England.
As Anne is still reeling from this, her uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, sat there, delivers the sentence, and it's this.
Because thou hast offended against our sovereign the King's grace in committing treason against his person, and here attainted of the same, the law of the realm is this, that thou hast deserved death. And thy judgment is this, that thou shalt be burned here, within the Tower of London on the Green, or else to have thy head smitten off, as the King's pleasure shall be further known.
Well, this is just horrific. The sentence for treason is to either be burnt or beheaded. Well, the latter is preferable. It's the swifter death. But both are Anne's worst nightmare. She hasn't seen this coming. Now she knows that she's going to die. We can only imagine what must be going through her mind, but this is when Anne is extraordinarily courageous.
As the room erupts into chaos, Anne's composure doesn't waver for a second.
Why is she so unmoved? Is it just the shock? That would be understandable. But I can't help feeling it's something else. And it's Anne's determination to show no fear, no dismay in front of the men who have brought her down, because that would hand them yet another victory.
Anne Boleyn has been found guilty of the most serious crime imaginable: high treason. But is her fate sealed? Surely she has the right to challenge the verdict. Lawyer Afua Hirsch has been studying Anne's case.
I've never come across such a blatant unfairness. Even by the standards of its day, it was a complete outrage.
Today, if you were in Anne's position and the verdict went against you, what recourse would you have?
Well, the obvious thing would be an appeal. All of those things that are lacking in her first trial should have been addressed in an appeal, where an appeal judge would say, well, what exactly is the evidence? And what did the witnesses say? And it's really a check on exactly this kind of abusive process. It's almost impossible now for somebody to be convicted of the most serious sentence without an appeal.
The other thing that strikes me is the trial takes place in a single day, probably a few hours, if that.
The idea that something this serious could be dealt with in a few hours is absolutely abhorrent to me. So if somebody's going to die, you would want to make sure that everything has been done properly and in a fair way.
But perhaps the reason for all this unfairness was the most sinister part of Anne's trial.
I think the real elephant in the room is obviously King Henry VIII himself. We have a monarch who is able to directly interfere in legal proceedings, bully and intimidate witnesses, judges. And I suppose the thing that explains all of this blatant unfairness is the fear that everyone must have had that if they didn't deliver the verdict the king wanted, they would be next. This is a trial in name only. Nothing about this meets even the most basic standards of justice.
With the verdict delivered, silence descends on the courtroom.
Still with incredible dignity and poise, Anne delivers a speech. She says, "I do not say that I have always borne towards the king the humility
to which I owed him, considering the great honour and respect he always paid me. I admit too that often I have taken it into my head to be jealous of him. But may God be my witness if I have done him any other wrong."
It's such a well thought out speech and delivered without hesitation. It's tempting to think that Anne has prepared in advance, but remember, she doesn't believe that this is going to happen. She thoroughly believes she's innocent and will be found such. So it seems that actually this speech is just delivered from the heart.
To mark the guilty verdict, cannons fire, which reverberates across London. In his palace at Westminster, the king hears the signal and knows that the deed is done. The coast is almost clear for him to marry Jane Seymour. Anne is escorted out of the courtroom. The guards turn their axe blades towards her. As Anne is taken back to her apartment in the Tower, her brother George Boleyn is escorted into the Great Hall for his trial.
George, like Anne, defends himself eloquently, but also like Anne, he doesn't stand a chance. He's found guilty and taken back to the Tower so that he can prepare for death.
2 days have passed since Anne's trial. Imprisoned, she still believes salvation is possible. But then, near the Tower, something shocking happens.
Henry Norris, Mark Smeaton, William Brereton, Francis Weston and George Boleyn have been brought up there on Tower Hill for their execution. Their only crumb of comfort is that they're to be given the more merciful death of beheading, rather than the traitor's death of hanging, drawing and quartering. The first to be executed is George Boleyn because he's highest in rank. Poor Mark Smeaton is the last. By then, the block and the scaffold would have been covered in blood, and the axe would have been blunter. Well, Anne may have seen the men being led out up to Tower Hill for their execution, and she may be watching now as their bloodied remains are brought back.
With her co-accused now dead, Anne must summon all her courage to stay strong, as she hopes and prays that the king will have mercy and grant her a last-minute reprieve.
It's the early hours of the 19th of May, 1536.
4 days ago, Anne Boleyn, Queen of England, was tried here, at the Tower of London, and found guilty of adultery. incest, and even worse, treason against her husband, King Henry VIII.
She's been condemned to die. It's a stark reminder of just how quickly her star has fallen.
I'm historian Tracy Borman. Over 3 nights, I'm exploring the extraordinary story of Anne's downfall.
Look at that, it's just exquisite.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
It all took place in the space of just 17 days.
I've studied Anne for most of my life. I think I know her well, but I'm going to do something that I've never done before. I'm going to follow in Anne's footsteps, take the journey with her hour by hour during the 3 most important days from Queen to outcast to find the truth behind her downfall. That is incredible. And I just put it in my pocket.
I've already seen how Anne was arrested, tried, and sentenced to death. Now, in this final episode, I'm focusing on the darkest day of all, the 19th of May, 1536, the day Anne is set to be executed. I'll discover the order issued by King Henry VIII, which decides Anne's fate.
It's sad that behind this very bureaucratic document is a real person who's going to suffer a butchering, basically.
Will the king grant her a last-minute reprieve? Or is this Anne's final day? It's the dead of night. Nearly all of London is asleep. But not quite everyone. At the Tower of London, the yeoman warders are patrolling the grounds. Their prisoners secure inside. Unsurprisingly, in the Queen's apartments where Anne is spending her final hours, everyone is awake.
Although it's just a few hours until Anne's execution, she seems remarkably composed, even cheerful, laughing and joking with her ladies.
The constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, reports that Anne's moods swing between despair and hope.
He writes, "I have seen many men and also women executed, and all they have been in great sorrow.
But, to my knowledge, this lady has much joy and pleasure in death."
Maybe Anne is thinking that King Henry will intervene and save her at the 11th hour. Or perhaps she's just resigned to her fate.
After all, her marriage is over. She's lost all of her power and status. Her family has abandoned her, and she's been found guilty of the most evil of crimes. Perhaps she just wants to be put out of her misery.
At his base in Austin Friars, the man who is determined Anne will die today is sleeping. The King's chief advisor, Thomas Cromwell. Just 3 years ago, Cromwell masterminded Henry's marriage to Anne, hoping she'd give the king a son, but she hasn't. Cromwell and Anne are now at loggerheads, giving him the perfect opportunity to get rid of her. Now, the final part of his plan is falling into place.
2 days ago, the 5 men accused of adultery with Anne, including her own brother George, have been taken from inside the tower up to Tower Hill, where they were executed in full public view. Anne, on the other hand, is to have a private execution. She's to be the first person to be officially executed inside the walls of the tower. This means that they had to build a scaffold, and quickly. But why the need for such a rush?
Cromwell wants to get Anne's execution over and done with as quickly as possible, before the notoriously fickle King Henry changes his mind. A short distance upriver at Whitehall, the king is sleeping in his private apartments. In a matter of hours, he hopes to be rid of Anne, the woman who has failed to give him a son. As king, he needs a male heir to continue the Tudor dynasty. Already waiting in the wings is the woman he hopes will replace Anne and provide him with a son, Jane Seymour, Anne's former lady-in-waiting. Over the last few weeks, Thomas Cromwell has been working tirelessly to make it happen. He's managed to get Anne sentenced to death on trumped-up charges. Now he has to make sure her daughter Elizabeth can never become queen. But to do this, he must wipe the marriage from existence.
It's vital for Henry to have the marriage annulled. A divorce won't do. He wants it never to have happened in the first place.
Nothing must get in the way of the male heir Henry now hopes to have with Jane Seymour. Three days ago, Cromwell persuaded the Archbishop of Canterbury, Thomas Cranmer, to write off Henry's marriage to Anne.
Even though Cranmer has serious doubts about Anne's guilt, he agrees to Cromwell's request, perhaps to save his own skin. He says, on the basis of some true, just
and legitimate causes recently brought to our attention, the marriage was null and void, and had always been so, which made Anne's daughter, henceforth to be known as the Lady Elizabeth, a bastard.
This is yet another blow for Anne, because it means that her precious daughter Elizabeth is now technically illegitimate and has no right to the throne. It seems that Anne's legacy will be completely destroyed.
Today, 2 miles upriver from the Tower at Lambeth Palace, Thomas Cranmer, like Anne Boleyn, is unable to sleep. Cranmer is a firm supporter of Anne.
Cranmer's mind must be spinning. In a way, he knows Anne better than anyone because he's acted as her personal confessor.
Anne is deeply religious. If she had done anything wrong, she would have told Cranmer in order to seek forgiveness and be received into heaven. But even though he granted the annulment of her marriage to Henry, Cranmer is astounded at the charges.
It's interesting because the fact that Cranmer is so shocked and distraught by the allegations must mean he believes her to be innocent.
In fact, he told Henry he is
amazed, for I never had a better opinion of woman.
He must be desperately hoping that the king will change his mind, but he's also painfully aware that time is quickly running out.
As Cranmer paces around his garden, a close friend, Alexander Alice, arrives by boat.
Alice is in an agitated state. He tells Cranmer that he's been awoken by a terrible nightmare and recounts it all in gory detail.
It was revealed to me, whether I was asleep or awake I know not, the Queen's neck after her head had been cut off. And this so plainly that I could count the nerves, the veins, and the arteries.
Cranmer believes this is a premonition. Alice has not left home for days, so how could he know Anne is about to be executed?
He later recounted that Cranmer looked up to the sky and declared,
She who has been the Queen of England upon earth will today become a queen in heaven.
He is now utterly overcome with grief.
Despite believing Anne is innocent, Cranmer is losing hope that the king will grant a reprieve and save her from the sword. Time is running out. Anne is just 6 hours from execution. It's dawn. Anne is in the Queen's apartments at the Tower. She's with her chaplain, receiving her final communion. But this is a repeat of what happened yesterday, when Anne was supposed to be executed. Yet it was postponed, not once, but twice. Why is this? One theory is that Cromwell is worried there will be protests at the Tower in support of Anne.
People are starting to mutter against the guilty verdict. And Cromwell needs time to clear them out of the Tower before the execution can take place. This is torture for Anne. They say hope is harder to deal with than despair, and perhaps growing within her is a notion that the king is having second thoughts.
Anne, still in her apartments, is preparing to face the world for the last time. Her distraught ladies-in-waiting dress her.
Hi, Larry. Hi, Tracy.
She carefully chooses every item of clothing to send a message to those watching her execution. Hilary Lynn is a world expert in Tudor clothing. She's reconstructing what Anne wore.
Well, we know that she was wearing a red kirtle, so that's what we understand to be an underdress. A red kirtle was quite a sort of normal thing to wear in the 16th century. Peasants wore red scarlet petticoats. So it may be that she was wearing it to appear humble, so she's sort of one of the people.
But it also plays to that idea of humility, and that's certainly what she wants to project now.
Educated on the continent, Anne is famed for her flamboyant French style of dress. She usually wears rich, colourful, imported fabrics. But today, for her outer gown, she chooses something much more subdued.
I think the choice of the grey or the black fabric is quite important because that is the colour of piety and sobriety at court. It's the colour of the officials and the lawyers.
all play to Anne trying to be quite meek, which is not what she's known to be otherwise.
I think what she's actually doing here is dressing down.
She's using everything possible in her armoury to try and get out of this.
Anne is guilty of treason, punishable by death. But the jury didn't specify the method of execution. A Queen of England has never before been sentenced to death, so this is new territory. Deep within the National Archives lies an extraordinary and rarely seen document that provides a glimpse into how the decision was made. Tucked away inside a 500-year-old book is something truly remarkable, a record of the execution warrant for Anne Boleyn. It sets out how she's to die.
The penalty under the Treason Act that this all would have proceeded under for a woman would be to be burned and for a man to be hanged, drawn and quartered.
Burning is a slow, excruciating death. Beheading isn't that much better, at least with an axe, because axes can be very blunt. It can take several blows to sever a head.
But the document reveals that for Anne, Henry chooses an alternative method of execution.
So they've made a record, and that's where he says,
We, moved by pity, not wishing the Lady Anne to be burned, direct the Constable of the Tower that on the green, within the Tower of London, the said Anne shall have her head cut from her body.
Because, of course, Henry orders a sword rather than an axe, the axe being blunter, more kind of brutal form of death. So that wording could be significant. Cut away, not chopped away.
Yeah, I think this is, again, some sense of mercy in the king's involvement in the process.
When Anne is told of Henry's decision that she's to be beheaded by sword, she shows her dark sense of humour.
She puts her hands around her neck and laughs heartily and says, "It'll be a swift death because I have just a little neck."
These instructions for Anne's execution were sent to the Tower just yesterday, giving Sir William Kingston, the Constable of the Tower, little time to prepare.
What this document does make very, very clear is the unprecedented nature of all of this. A Queen of England has never been executed before. They have to get it right. And worryingly, for any future wives, now they know exactly what to do next time.
Beheading by sword is a French method of execution. So, the king has summoned an expert swordsman from Saint-Omer in France. He arrived at the Tower yesterday, and soon he will have the daunting task of being the first man to execute an English queen.
There's something quite intriguing about the time frame here, because somebody would have had to have gone to summon the swordsman. You can't just pick up a phone in those days, and obviously travel is a lot slower. So they would have travelled down from London to Dover by horse, and then, of course, sailed over the Channel and on to Calais, and from there it was a bit further on to Saint-Omer, where the swordsman was. That would have taken at least 3 days, and then, of course, at least 3 days for the swordsman to travel back. That's 6 days in total, at least.
This is a damning piece of evidence, because what it means is that, incredibly, the swordsman must have been summoned before the verdict of Anne's trial was delivered, just 5 days ago.
It was a foregone conclusion. Whatever Anne does or says, it seems she's going to be executed.
This is meant to be a private execution, to preserve Anne's dignity and to prevent anyone from trying to rescue her. So the public were ordered to leave the tower. But the gates have accidentally been left open, so now crowds are gathering in anticipation of the execution.
1,000 people have come in, people of all ranks of society, to witness what is about to unfold here on the scaffold. It seems incredible to think that people would willingly choose to come and watch as a person's head is severed from their body. But it's like the grim fascination we have with crime dramas or watching as the latest celebrity is shamed by the media. Only this is much worse.
Among those gathering are men from the King's Council, including Anne's uncle, the Duke of Norfolk. There is also the King's illegitimate son, the Duke of Richmond.
Well, he's there, perhaps as a reminder to Anne that the King has no trouble fathering sons.
Then, the architect of Anne's downfall arrives. Thomas Cromwell. He's about to witness the concluding part of his plan to dispose of Anne Boleyn. Everything is in place for the execution. Sir William Kingston now heads for the Queen's apartments to summon Anne. Time is running out. At the Tower of London, in the Queen's apartments, Anne Boleyn is dressed and waiting to be called. It's the job of the Constable of the Tower, Sir William Kingston, to make sure Anne's execution all goes to plan. With the time approaching, he heads over to collect her.
Kingston arrives at Anne's door. You can only imagine what she's thinking at this moment, because on the one hand, it's what she's been dreading all along.
Perhaps she is hoping that, against the odds, Kingston has come with a message from the King informing her that he has come to his senses and she will be pardoned.
Well, if she does hope that, it's soon shattered when Kingston tells her to make ready for her execution.
Anne replies calmly,
"Acquit yourself of your charge, for I have long been prepared."
It seems extraordinary that Anne is so ready to meet her fate, and it's a real testament to her strength of character. Her great enemy, Ambassador Chapuis, once remarked,
"She was braver than a lion."
His words were never more true than on this, the last day of her life.
Upriver at his palace in Whitehall is the one man who can put a stop to the execution. The King. But there's no sign he's about to change his mind. As he's dressed by his gentlemen, he's listening out for cannon fire from the Tower of London. This will signal that Anne is dead and he's free to remarry. Anne is about to be led by Sir William Kingston from the sanctuary of her apartments through Cold Harbour Gate to the scaffold on the other side of the White Tower, where she'll be executed. She is to be accompanied by her 4 ladies-in-waiting.
There's a terrible irony to all of this. The last time Anne was here was just 3 years ago for her coronation celebrations. Her story has come full circle.
Anne, her ladies and Kingston are met by a procession of 200 yeomen of the King's Guard, followed by the officers of the Tower and her chaplain.
She is escorted the short distance towards the Cold Harbour Gate. She knows that what awaits her around that corner is the scaffold.
The massed spectators are desperate to get a glimpse of the fallen Queen.
And she also sees for the first time the scaffold where she's to be beheaded. There's a hushed silence as she walks through the crowds. People comment that she's never looked more beautiful. Even now, with time running out, Anne is looking all around her as if hoping to see a messenger from the king carrying a royal pardon. But there is no messenger.
Among the crowd, Anne sees familiar faces. These are the men who once raised her to be queen. Her own uncle, the Duke of Norfolk, and the architect of her downfall, Thomas Cromwell. They are here to make sure Anne's life and her powerful influence are destroyed permanently.
Kingston helps Anne to mount the steps onto the scaffold. She turns to her ladies who are weeping and comforts them. And then she sees the executioner who's looking apprehensive at what he is about to do. What Anne doesn't see is the sword, which is hidden underneath the straw so as not to alarm her.
Anne asks Kingston for permission to speak.
She doesn't look like someone who's about to be executed. Eyewitnesses say that she's smiling, and it's with such a cheerful countenance that she turns to address the crowds. Good Christian people, I am come hither to die, for according to the law and by the law I am judged to die.
Therefore I will speak nothing against it. I am come hither to accuse no man, nor to speak anything of that whereof I am accused and condemned to die. But I pray, God save the king, and send him long to reign over you. For a gentler nor a more merciful prince was there never. And to me he was ever a good, a gentle, and sovereign lord. And thus I take my leave of the world and of you all. And I heartily desire you all to pray for me. O Lord, have mercy on me. To God I commend my soul.
Anne's words reduce many spectators to tears.
Well, this is an incredibly humble speech, perhaps not what we expect of Anne, the woman renowned for her feistiness and outspoken manner. What's she actually saying here? Well, I think she's trying to make the king look kindly on those whom she leaves behind, none more so than their daughter, Elizabeth.
Then Anne is invited to confess the truth. But instead she replies,
I know I shall have no pardon, but they shall know no more from me.
She is maintaining her innocence right to the very end.
The swordsman takes off his shoes so that Anne won't hear him approach.
Anne removes her headdress. One of her ladies hands her a linen cap. She tucks her hair inside so it won't get in the way of the sword.
The executioner steps forward, kneels before Anne, and begs her forgiveness for what he's about to do. He asks Anne to kneel and say her prayers.
The crowd falls to its knees. It's time for the execution. The executioner picks up his sword as Anne Boleyn kneels down on the scaffold. Her eyes are bandaged. Dazed, she says, "Jesus, have pity on my soul."
The crowd falls completely silent. The next thing to happen is that the swordsman signals to an assistant who makes a noise, distracting Anne.
The executioner's hands tremble in distress.
And in that moment, the executioner swings his sword twice over his head to gain momentum, and then in one strike, severs Anne's head.
Anne's head falls to the straw on the scaffold. Horrified eyewitnesses claim they can see her lips still moving in silent prayer. People begin to weep.
The Queen of England, as she was, is dead. One of Anne's ladies bravely picks up her head and covers it in a linen cloth, the blood still dripping from it.
The other three ladies, deeply distressed and refusing to let any man touch her, pick up her body.
And together they carry Anne away.
Cannons at the tower fire out, reverberating across London, announcing that the Queen of England is dead. At Whitehall, the King hears the cannons. It's the signal he's been waiting for.
Henry takes no time to mourn Anne's loss, or even to celebrate it with a great feast, as he had the death of his first wife, Catherine. Instead, he boards his royal barge and travels the short distance upriver to Chelsea and into the arms of the waiting Jane Seymour.
At the Tower, Anne's body is laid to rest. Not in a coffin, but in an old arrow chest. It's been taken from the Tower's weapons store, which is right next to the execution site.
Well, you might think there isn't room for a body in an arrow chest, but the arrows are actually laid end to end like this, so it is actually quite long, but it is also narrow, so it's quite lucky that Anne was a very slender lady. But why hasn't anyone prepared a proper coffin? Anne was once Queen of England.
It could simply be because there was no time to source a coffin. After all, Cromwell had rushed through the Queen's execution as quickly as possible.
I wonder, though, if there is another reason. Responsibility for the execution and all of the arrangements for it lies with William Kingston, Constable of the Tower.
Is it possible that he, like Anne, didn't really believe that Henry would go through with the execution?
Anne's body is brought here to the Tower Chapel, where it's stripped of her jewellery and her expensive but blood-stained clothes.
Incredibly, Henry will pass the jewels and clothing of his dead wife onto his new wife, Jane Seymour.
At midday, 3 hours after Anne's execution, she's buried in the chancel next to her brother George.
Every year, on May the 19th, the anniversary of Anne's execution, an anonymous bouquet of red roses is delivered to the Tower.
They are to be laid just over there, on the spot where Anne Boleyn was buried in 1536. It's touching to think that Anne is still remembered almost 500 years after her death.
In executing Anne, Thomas Cromwell has pulled off a massive coup. He has got rid not just of the Queen of England, but of all her faction. Cromwell goes on to become the most powerful man in England after the king. But, as Anne Boleyn learned, no one is safe in the Tudor court.
In a dramatic twist of fate, he falls from Henry's favour. 4 years later, he too is executed.
There's a final postscript to this story. After Anne's execution, Henry and Cromwell tried to erase her from history. Her letters and portraits were destroyed, and her initials and emblems that once adorned the royal palaces were removed. But there was one thing they couldn't get rid of. Despite being queen for just 3 years, Anne left England one of its greatest legacies. 22 years later, against all odds, her daughter was crowned Queen Elizabeth I. She ruled for 44 years. At the Prime Minister's country home, Chequers, is evidence that Elizabeth never forgot her mother.
We now find ourselves in the great parlour.
Curator Rodney Melville is giving me exclusive access to a ring worn by the Queen that contains a secret.
So, here we have Elizabeth's ring.
Oh, this is just incredible to see.
If you lift the E in diamonds.
It's so delicate. That's incredible. There is Anne with her very characteristic French hood, and then facing her, Elizabeth her daughter. Look at that, it's just exquisite.
It's wonderful, isn't it?
And the face shape, you can see Anne had a very long, slim face,
yes.
exactly as is shown here. But it's just so intricate, isn't it? It's absolutely beautiful.
It is amazing.
What a piece of history. I have written about this. I've never seen it in the flesh. As a historian, it doesn't get much better than seeing this, so thank you.
Elizabeth kept her feelings about her mother private, but she cherished this ring. It's said it was removed from her finger on her deathbed.
If you look at the portrait of Anne Boleyn, right at the bottom there is a diamond, whereas Elizabeth I only has a ruby.
Ah, so her mother's jewels are superior. Is this Elizabeth kind of deferring to Anne?
Very possibly.
That's remarkable. Yet another show of respect, of reverence, even for her late mother.
Yes, I think so.
There's one other intriguing aspect of this ring.
Elizabeth wore pearls a lot. It symbolised her virginity, her purity. And I think it's quite interesting that this ring is fashioned from mother of pearl, that idea of purity, of innocence, and Anne is there.
Elizabeth was said to rarely speak of her mother, but this ring speaks for her. It seems to show what Elizabeth really felt about the woman condemned as an adulteress.
What it also very, very clearly illustrates is Anne's most valuable legacy, her daughter, of course, who was a disappointment at the time of her birth and really was the beginning of the end for Anne. But little did Henry know that it was his reviled second wife who would give him his most successful child. To think that this was on Elizabeth's finger.
Yes.
It's amazing.
When I set out on this journey to follow 3 very significant days at the end of Anne's life, I had so many assumptions about Anne and her story. But re-examining the evidence in real time, rather than looking back, has shattered those ideas.
Stripping back the layers of rumour and downright lies that have surrounded Anne for 500 years makes it clear just how groundless the case against her was and how courageous she was in the face of it all. Well, living Anne's story with her day by day and hour by hour has brought home to me just how deeply shocking it was to execute a Queen of England. It's also made me realise that most people didn't really believe Henry VIII would go through with it. Above all, Anne herself.